Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Corey Linehan. I'm thrilled to join you all this afternoon. I'm Associate Director of the Center for Negotiation and Dispute Resolution at UC Law SF, and I am honored to be able to introduce our keynote speaker, Beth Noveck, who is the author of Reboot, AI and the Race to Save Democracy, and a professor at Northeastern University with a very impressive range of appointments in law, engineering, policy, communications, and computer science. She also directs the Burns Center for Social Change and the Governance Lab at Northeastern. And her work there focuses on democratic AI, or how AI can strengthen democratic institutions and improve democratic government performance. Along with that theme, she's previously served in public sector roles at the White House, 10 Downing Street, the German Chancellery, and she founded the White House Open Government Initiative. Today, she leads Innovate US, which supports free public sector learning, and its research initiative, which designs and deploys AI tools to improve public outcomes. So Beth is going to join us today to talk a little bit about the journey for technology and dispute resolution over the past several decades. And we'll start with a question on that theme. So you've been working at the intersection of technology, participation, and governance since the early days of the web, when online was something kooky folks out in California were doing. Can you take us back? What was the vision that animated the work back at the start?
Well, thank you very much. And thank you really to Colin and to Leah for all of the work in bringing us together. I'm really happy to be back. I haven't been with this community for quite some time because I've taken a detour from law into government. But I'm super happy to be back on this very celebratory occasion, and that apropos of kooky people from California, that you finally made it here on your somewhat lengthy journey. It didn't take 30 years, but at least you made it by lunchtime, which I'm glad about. The conversation we can have here. So 30 years ago, and I wanted us to sort of dive in a little bit historically, because the conversation today is obviously in honor of Ethan, and it wouldn't be if it weren't for him. And Ethan, you may or may not remember when we first met each other, but it is close to that long ago, I fear. As I'm sure a lot of people in this room have a similar story to tell. When your work about life behind the screen and what it would mean for us, what it could mean for us in changing our human behavior, what it would mean for us in changing our institutions, I think was sort of really the incredible promise. 30 years ago, in the era of John Perry Barlow and his manifesto on the freedom of cyberspace, Post and Johnson, Joel Reidenberg was also invoked yesterday, talking about the free speech possibilities of the internet and what it might mean. We had this great hope, this great promise of what would happen with life online. I have the dubious distinction in 1999 of having started a company with a political philosopher. Never start a company with a political philosopher. It will explain why I am not a billionaire and not in business, but remain a university professor and a public servant. Is we had this great hope that we would open up and democratize the places in which we speak, that we would now have this opportunity to essentially not just as individuals be able to speak. And I think what was so exciting about Ethan's work very uniquely, a lot of people were talking about individual free speech. But what Ethan was really doing at the time, and what inspired me, was this notion of thinking about groups, about teams, about negotiation, about how we as collectives speak online and come to an understanding. So all of that to say, I think, we had this great hope, and the project we did was called Unchat, that in a world of broadcast scarcity, of what the quaint idea now of limited information, in which a few elite people really control the means of production, that we would democratize this great opportunity for all of us to talk, but to talk in these incredibly productive ways that we aspired to. I'm not sure I answered the question because I am so focused on wanting to make sure to just really take us back to recognize how truly path-breaking the contributions you made were in getting us to think not only as individuals about free speech, but in thinking about this collective opportunity for how, as societies and importantly as institutions, we might change the way that we behave.
So you hinted at this a little bit, but there's this moment in the early internet, a lot of idealism around free speech, around bringing information and making it more accessible. Why have things proven so challenging over the past several decades?
Yeah, so I think, the technology has changed tremendously, and we have adopted it, and it has permeated our lives, as you've seen and heard this morning. But our institutions have changed so little. I sort of liken democratic institutions to the umbrella. It sort of feels like something we could have reimagined and done better at, and I don't know why we're so stuck. So to your question, why are we not able to re-engineer the plane while we're flying it? I think there's a lot of explanations for this. I'd be interested to see what people say here. But I think that number one, we underestimated, or as Bush liked to say, we misunderestimated that if we simply changed information flows, we would change how institutions work, and underestimated the forces of money and power, the incentives in the system, number one. Number two, I think some of the blame lies at the feet of those of us in the academy. I really think that fundamentally, and this is where, again, Ethan was so path-breaking and so unique and remains so unique and really in the minority, the assumption that ordinary people have extraordinary things to say and do and contribute is not a widely held view even now. And I think that the academy in particular tends to perpetuate a view of expertise and the monopolization of knowledge, especially in the professions, that we have all contributed to. And it's why our institutions continue to be pervaded by this expertocratic notion of top-down control and power. Our view of what citizens can do is really rather anemic. We rely on our view of democracy is that we're going to vote once a year or once every 2 years or once every 4 years. Maybe we'll ask people's opinions now and again. But the notion that we really could fundamentally democratize not only how we consume information, but how we produce it is still not a widely held view, and it's not pervasive. And I brought all these papers I'm shuffling up here as the printout of an article that Ethan did 20 years ago that I had the privilege to participate in which he wrote, and I quote, "The new communications technology that connects people across networks may make it possible to identify legal authority from news sources that were not previously relied upon or perceived as legitimate, making authoritative information not only widely available to consume, but widely available to produce. Technology is potentially enabling groups of the human knowledge of ordinary people's experience rather than just books produced by an elite few to become sources of authority." I think that view is not yet we haven't done enough to widely disseminate that view. And that is why, in part, we have not been able to do more to democratize the way things work. Finally, and last point, the technology we've had up until now has not made it easy. It's made it much, much cheaper for people to talk, but therefore concomitantly more difficult for the rest of us, and especially for institutions, to listen. That increased cost of listening, learning, understanding has actually, I think, made it very difficult to realize the vision we had at the outset of more democratization, of more participation, of greater deliberation that we would have, I think, all liked to see and had predicted 30 years ago, and that hasn't fully realized itself.
So you're drawing this contrast between a sort of top-down culture and a culture that derives a lot from economic incentives, and contrasting that with this vision that's very much of distributed authority and bottom-up. And today we have these systems, AI systems, that do something a lot like that are able to go out and examine the full corpus of what exists online. Did you all see this coming? And to what extent is this the future that you were envisioning 30, 40 years ago?
So I'd like to say that we predicted large language models. And I will say there is a way that we didn't. We contributed to them in the sense that the work that many of us were involved in around opening up data. Side note, when I worked for the White House, we wanted to take the whole corpus of patent data and put it up online and make it more transparent. We couldn't do it because had we uploaded that 15 terabytes of data to a server and allowed people to download it, we would have crashed the entire US Patent Office. We didn't have a server that powerful. So Google came to us and said, we would be happy to host it for you for free. And we said, oh, that's so nice. They're so generous. What we didn't realize at the time was that generous offer was an effort to get at a very large corpus of training data to begin the work of developing translation models. And LLMs and generative AI are the outgrowth of trying to solve the problem of language translation. Patent data, which exists in the US in English, and then sometimes the same patents in other languages in Europe, where it's translated to multiple languages, ultimately ended up becoming some of the fodder for the development of LLMs. Okay, anecdote aside, we didn't anticipate, obviously, what we have now in quite the same way. But I think the notion that technology, again, could become a place where we would democratize not just, again, as Ethan said, the consumption of knowledge, but the production of knowledge is very much what we're seeing with AI. I think the challenge is we have this phenomenon, if to the extent to which the knowledge on the web reflects our human knowledge, fantastic, and we're getting faster and faster access to this. As I think we saw with some of the discussions about coaching tools this morning, our ability to really tap into collective wisdom, collective intelligence, and to translate that into advice giving is still fairly difficult. My students and I are working on a coaching tool ourselves right now in a different context, coaching people, in this case, on how to do public engagement. We have two agents running, one that pulls from the corpus of written knowledge, the other that pulls from a corpus of tacit knowledge. It's based on interviews with humans about how to do things well, something that just doesn't exist in the written and research literature. So it's an experiment, and it's early and it's live. I'll share a URL for it. As we're trying to figure out and begin to move towards an answer to this question of how can we truly think about using AI as a way to invigorate collective intelligence and collective action. I don't think we're there yet, but we're on the way.
So it sounds like a lot of promise for AI and civil society. A lot of your work today also focuses on AI and improving institutions themselves. What is exciting about how that's going today, and where are there some challenges?
So let me come back to the point earlier about how the web made it easy to speak, and AI, when we use it well, makes it easier to listen. So what I'm most excited about, and I'm going to, if you'll allow me again, connect this back to Ethan. He's going to tell me to stop talking in a moment, I fear, but I have the mic. Is that what Ethan again inspired was this notion that we not only are trying to make the way that we do things, resolve disputes more scalable, faster, more efficient, but we're fundamentally really trying to change the way the process works itself and to open up new ways of doing things, sort of a whole new vista on access to justice. So what I'm excited about, fast forward, and I will apply this a little more in my domain that I know better in the government space, is the institutions that are moving from what you hear a lot about in the news, which is AI makes us X% more efficient. We are saving Y a number of minutes on answering the phone and writing this email and doing this draft. All of that is great. Yay, economists measuring all the efficiency stuff. I'm really excited about the transformational impacts that may allow us to make our institutions more collaborative and more participatory. It is the city of Hamburg building AI tools, not just, again, to allow people to speak, but building open source, free back-end system to analyze the comments that citizens are making on land use decisions and urban planning. What that's resulted in, not only the time and cost savings that instead of spending months and literally millions on trying to analyze a set of comments, it now takes hours. And as a result, every single environmental and infrastructure and land use decision is made with public engagement. Not only that, but the same tools are shared by 9 other cities, allowing them to move to not just participation as a one-off, but participation as the kind of modus operandi, as the standard way of doing business. So it's this combination of, I don't want to underestimate the benefits of the efficiencies for allowing us to unlock some of that earlier vision, some of the things we aspired to that just frankly were too costly to do before. You know, there's an academic at Stanford by the name of Jim Fishkin, who many people may know his work because he was very path-breaking as an academic outside of the legal space, who said, I'm going to go out and not just do research, I'm going to do research in the field by doing public engagements and deliberation with citizens. But every time Jim ran one of his, what he called a deliberative poll, the price tag is between $2 and $4 million. How often do you think we're going to do a deliberative poll, getting citizens together around a table to deliberate on an issue, when it costs $2 to $4 million every time that you do it? With AI, now it's not only not $2 to $4 million, it's decreasing the costs over what we did before, allowing for, I think, a sea change in practice. Again, if we have the vision and the desire and the momentum to move towards this new way of working.
So a lot of optimism here. A lot of the
Always.
a lot of the conversation around AI in public spaces and in government focuses on risks and potential harm. Where is that concern justified?
So let me say the concern is extraordinarily justified for several reasons, and then I'm going to tell you why it's not justified. It's justified because, yet again, the tools that we are using that drive this revolution are all tools that are controlled by private entities that we have no control over, no insight over, that are accountable to no one. The fact that OpenAI and Anthropic are going public is actually sort of viewed as, oh, we might get a little bit of financial transparency into these companies, even if we have no transparency into the underlying workings of the models. So I think, you know, given the experience we've had with the transition from a government to a commercial internet and World Wide Web, the disaster that has been social media and the effort to monetize eyeballs and to, you know, produce and manufacture outrage as a way to keep us on these platforms. What Anne Applebaum calls the democracy's dumpster fire is how she refers to social media. I think the commercial control of these things and the lack of regulation and oversight obviously give us a lot of pause, which is why we've seen these discussions about risk, number one. Number two, the lack of understanding, know-how, and education is very, very concerning. If you don't know what these tools do, what they're good at, and what they're not good at, we're going to buy very stupid stuff. We're going to go out and buy those bad predictive algorithms that deprive somebody of a government benefit, that send somebody back to prison, that accuse you of fraud, mistakenly. CEG, Mr. Bates versus the Post Office, if you haven't seen the Netflix movie of what happens when we over-rely on bad technology. If we don't know what these things can do, we will use them very poorly, I think is a great concern. So there's, in the interest of time, let me just skip to the what's not a risk, or maybe this is the worst risk of all. I'll put it that way. The worst risk of all is that we only talk about the risks. If we are all the time wringing our hands and criticizing, we are not investing the time and effort into saying, what are the things, the systems we want to build? How do we want to do things right? Now, that is not a message that anyone in this room needs to hear, except insofar as to say, you cannot talk loudly enough about the work that you are doing, because the rest of the world is talking about the robot apocalypse. The rest of the world is talking about how AI will eat all the jobs. The rest of the world is talking about these defensive mechanisms, only what we need to not do. And as a result, we're not talking about what are the investments we need to make, what's the education that we need to have, what are the research questions we need to study. So I think we need to just be talking more about these positive possibilities, even though it's very unfashionable to do so today.
So in the interest of time as well, just one final question. Holding the promise that animated the work in the days of the early internet, the promise that you're painting for, and the vision you're painting for AI going forward, and those risks. What does success look like 10 years from now?
Okay, it's the last question. So one more Ethan comment. And then, which is, and I also think that success looks like much, much more of the kinds of work that you also inspired, which I think we cannot underestimate and which people are hungry for now in a way that I haven't seen in 20 or 30 years, which is this notion of the engaged academic, the person who is both thinking the deep and big ideas, writing the books, doing the research, but then going out into the world, changing practice, doing the kind of field building that this community is synonymous with. It's not as uncommon for lawyers who have a tradition of public interest and clinical work to kind of go out and do things. It's not as uncommon either for doctors where, you can do research, but if you don't cure the patient, it's not really considered very valuable. But I think the broader kind of culture, again, especially where we've drifted to in the academy, has really lost sight of this idea of social impact. So I think for us, 30 years from now, we are looking back at, number one, a much different view of how we think about what we do in universities around social change and social impact. Number two, the successes we saw over the last 10 years with data, a sort of real sea change in recognizing the importance of data in decision making and evidence in decision making, opening up of data, something we now know don't need to explain anymore, talk about anymore. People understand data matters. I would like us to see deliberation, participation, dispute resolution, these kind of collaborative processes be, again, the norm in how all of our institutions function. I think we can get there now with the help of AI because it's now bringing down the cost of otherwise rather complicated human processes. So my hope is our institutions are fundamentally transformed in the way that we had hoped 30 years ago. It may take us a little longer, but I think we're going to get there.
It's an amazing portrait for where we may end up. Thank you for sharing your wisdom.
Thank you for the questions. Thank you.